This program contains graphic images that may disturb some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello out there everybody, Manny here at Area 503, and I hope you all have been well since our last video.
Today I want to tell you all an interesting story about a remote location in the Himalayan mountains that is known as Skeleton Lake. Skeleton Lake is officially named Roopkund and is located some 16,000 feet or 5,000 meters above sea level in the Himalayan mountains. Dang, that's up there. Anyhow, let's take a look at Roopkund on Google Earth. Look at that, it's really up in the middle of the Himalayan mountains in the middle of nowhere. And I noticed something interesting right off the bat. Roopkund is not a naturally forming lake. Well, that makes sense because you won't see many lakes at this altitude with all this steep topography like you're seeing around this region. But it certainly looks to me like this lake was formed by an impact crater of some kind. That is interesting. You don't see any other impact craters around here, and there's no other obvious damage from the impact, but it did create this crater where the lake formed. Interesting. Okay, so you're probably wondering, how is it that a small lake in the middle of nowhere came to be known as Skeleton Lake? Well, for the answer to that, let's take a little trip through time. Computer.
Hello, wonderful people.
Fire up the Area 503 time machine and take us back to 1942.
Yes, Manny.
No, we want to go to Roopkund in northern India and set the interaction mode to passive observation only. Thank you.
No, it's not, Emmanuel. Buenas noches.
So here we are at the Nanda Devi Game Reserve in northeast India, and a game warden is in the area investigating rumors of a local legend when he discovers a lake that appears to contain an unknown number of human remains. It was impossible to determine how many bodies were in the lake, but initial estimates concluded there was at least dozens and could be as many as 100. And so it appears that the legend of Skeleton Lake is more than a legend after all. There was indeed a lake in the middle of the Himalayan mountains with scores of human remains in it. But who were these people who died in such a remote location? Why were they there? And how did they die? Well, initially, authorities believed that the remains might have been a secret raiding or invasion party sent by the Japanese. That's right, they suspected that the invasion party had been lost in the wintertime and that they had tried to ride out the cold winter season near the lake only to have perished in the extreme temperatures. Well, that seems like a plausible story to me. An invasion party on foot in the Himalayan mountains passes away from exposure during a cold winter. But the invasion theory didn't hold up for very long. You see, shortly after they began to remove some of the remains for identification, they discovered that these remains had been in Skeleton Lake for a very long time, far too long to be Japanese soldiers. So, we're back to square one, but at least we have a little bit more information. We know that these remains have been in the lake for quite some time, but exactly for how long of a time? Well, it turns out that the radiocarbon dating at Oxford's University Radiocarbon Accelerator unit dated the remains to be approximately 1,200 years old. That's right, folks, they were from the year 850, give or take 30 years or so. Later on, another radiocarbon dating technique would be used on the same remains, revealing yet another strange and unexplained property to these skeletons found in the lake at Roopkund. We'll talk more about that in a moment. For now, let me fill you in a little bit more about the legend of Skeleton Lake. The local story of Skeleton Lake goes back to about the same time frame, approximately the year 850. It is rumored that the king and his pregnant wife were on a pilgrimage to the remote mountain lake of Roopkund. The legend goes that the expedition reached the lake only to be faced with a hailstorm of epic proportions that killed the entire royal party. Now, that account would fit with all the evidence that we have so far, because not only were the human remains from the same time period as the king's fatal journey, but autopsies were performed on some of the remains, and those autopsies indicated that they were killed by injuries caused by round objects from above. So this seems to also support the legend of this king, his pregnant wife, and their entourage passing away in a massive hailstorm. And so it seems that the legend of Roopkund, the skeleton lake, could at last be solved. But sometimes when you solve a problem, you end up creating another problem. You see, there's a rub. Remember that new radiocarbon test that I mentioned previously? Well, it turns out that the new test featured not only updated radiocarbon dating technologies, but also included a genome-wide analysis of 38 of the bodies found in Skeleton Lake. The much more advanced dating methods revealed that of the 38 bodies tested, 23 had South Asian ancestry and were dated at 800 AD. One of the bodies had Southeastern Asian DNA and was dated at 1800 AD, and the remaining 14 subjects were also dated at 1800 AD, but had Eastern Mediterranean DNA, specifically from present-day people in Greece. What? So, of the 38 bodies that were tested and were found atop the Himalayan mountains in this remote lake, we have DNA samples from different regions of the world and from 2 different times spanning 1,000 years. This is downright amazing. I mean, I just assumed that if you found a strange lake in the middle of nowhere with ancient human remains in it, that it was most likely an archaeological score of great significance, and it is. But now we have another mystery to solve. If there are human remains from 2 different time periods, 1,000 years apart, why were they killed in the same fashion and their bodies found in the same location? You see what I meant earlier? Sometimes solving one problem creates another. So where are we at today with Roopkund? Well, presently, remains have been identified from over 300 individual human beings. Unfortunately, other than the original 38 samples selected for those tests that we spoke about previously, none of the remaining bodies have been tested any further. We can only hope that there are plans to test some of these remaining samples, if not all of them at some point. But as of this date, there are no known plans to do so. In fact, not all of the remains have been removed from the location. You see, it turns out that a local population called the Nanda Devi have a festival at the lake every 12 years to honor the goddess Nanda. And this festival is linked to the legend of the Skeleton Lake, as the king who went missing back in 850 AD was most likely a worshipper of Nanda as well. And so the Skeleton Lake has become a sort of holy place in a sense, and also a curiosity, attracting hikers and visitors who have been reported taking some of the bones as souvenirs. Yuck, really? Taking a chunk of someone's bone for a trinket? Ugh. Okay, well, the local government put the kibosh on that one and turned the whole place into a nature preserve. But that doesn't answer the questions that I have about Skeleton Lake. Let's just assume for a second that some of the bodies from the lake are the king and his entourage from the legend back in 850 AD. Well, if that's the case, where did the other bodies come from that were dated in the 1800s? Who are those poor souls? And here's another question that really makes my head hurt. How do you have samples from bodies that were killed in the same manner and discovered in the same location, but that were killed almost 1,000 years apart? Ouch. Is it possible that Skeleton Lake has some sort of a link to something alien? Go with me for a second on this one. I said at the beginning of this episode that Skeleton Lake was formed by an impact crater, but to date, no meteorite has been found at the location. Is it possible that the lake was formed by the impact of a UFO? Perhaps a crashed one, or maybe not a crashed one, maybe even one that just landed hard. I mean, it is possible. So what if a UFO landed at Roopkund and a lake formed over the object? Wouldn't that be an awesome hiding place for your UFO? Especially if you were a life form hanging out inside the UFO and you could exit and return to the ship. It's perfect. It's like an underwater Motel 6 for aliens. Or maybe it was a portal that was opening up high up on the mountain. I mean, I suspect if you were to create a warp field or a portal inside of a pile of rock, the blast might look similar to a meteorite impact. I don't really know. I'm just kind of throwing ideas out here. I'm just trying to find some way to explain the time differences between the bodies that were found in Skeleton Lake. And how do we explain the genetic differences between them as well? How do we explain all of these different people from different places and times that all wound up killed in the same fashion and found in the same place? Is this evidence of some sort of time travel or time shifting? Is Roopkund an alien dumping ground for a being that was traveling time and collecting human beings for experimentation or food, perhaps? Or perhaps it might be a UFO hideout for some kind of alien life form that has an extremely long lifetime, perhaps in the thousands of years. I suppose anything is possible at this point because we still don't have all of the facts or evidence in this case. So until we do, I'm not going to commit to anything. Remember, only 38 of the known 300 individual samples found at Skeleton Lake have been genome tested with the new radiocarbon dating technology. I feel certain that when the rest of the samples are analyzed, that there is going to be many more samples from different regions and times. And so I think that the mystery of Skeleton Lake or Roopkund is truly just beginning. There is definitely going to be some kind of follow-up to this story, I guarantee it. We're just going to have to wait for some of that testing to be done to see what the results are. But for now, I'm putting my space bucks on some kind of time-traveling or long-living alien that chose a remote dumping ground. What do you guys think? Is Roopkund a dumping ground for some kind of time-traveling alien? Is it just a meteor crater in the mountains? Is it something else altogether that I missed? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear what you think. Well, for now, that's all I've got on Roopkund or Skeleton Lake. So I'm moving on to the next subject, or sighting, or music track, whatever's next. I don't know. I'll catch y'all later.
As always, this has been Manny at Area 503. And I wish you all the best until we meet again. And I am out of here to continue my search for universal truth.